The mahogany door of the Pentagon's river entrance slammed shut behind me as I walked through corridors I'd only seen in movies. My dress blues felt foreign after months in desert camouflage, the weight of my new insignia still unfamiliar on my shoulders. In 30 minutes I would stand before the most powerful military leaders in America, but all I could hear were my father's words from 23 years ago. "Marcus, you're a dreamer living in Fantasyland. Military? You can't even make your bed properly. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The secretary outside the chairman's office looked up from her desk, her smile professional but warm. "Lieutenant General Brennan, they're ready for you." The title still didn't feel real. 3 stars. 3 silver stars that represented a journey nobody in my family ever believed possible. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio wasn't the kind of childhood that breeds generals. Our house sat at the end of Maple Street, where the pavement cracked and the American flags hung a little more desperately than in the nicer neighborhoods. My father, Dennis Brennan, worked double shifts at the Ford plant, coming home with grease under his fingernails and disappointment in his eyes. My mother, Carol, cleaned houses for families whose children went to private schools, while hers struggled through public ones. I was the middle child of 3, sandwiched between my older brother Kevin, who had Dad's natural talent with engines, and my younger sister Sarah, who inherited Mom's gentle way with people. I was the odd one out, always reading military history books from the library, sketching battle formations in my notebooks, talking about West Point like other kids talked about Disney World. "Marcus lives in his own little world," my father would tell anyone who'd listen. "Head always in the clouds, thinking he's some kind of soldier. Kid can't even handle taking out the trash without supervision." The neighborhood barbecues were the worst. While Kevin showed off under car hoods and Sarah charmed the adults with her piano playing, I'd sit in the corner with my library books, earning eye rolls and whispered comments about that strange Brennan boy. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to Ohio State with a partial scholarship. Nothing spectacular but respectable for a kid from Maple Street. But I had different plans. I'd been secretly preparing for West Point for 2 years, studying advanced mathematics with Mrs. Henderson after school, running 5 miles every morning before dawn, learning everything I could about military history and strategy. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, United States Military Academy, full appointment. I remember holding that envelope with trembling hands, reading it 3 times to make sure it was real. This was it. My ticket out of Millfield, my chance to become something more than anyone expected. I found my parents in the living room, Dad watching the evening news, Mom folding laundry. The television was showing some story about budget cuts, but I couldn't focus on anything except the letter burning a hole in my pocket. "Dad, Mom, I have something to tell you." They looked up, probably expecting another story about some military book I'd checked out. I pulled out the letter, hands still shaking. "I got into West Point, full appointment. I'm going to be an officer in the United States Army." The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours. Dad's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. He stood up slowly, the way he did when he was really upset, and walked over to where I stood. "Let me see that." He snatched the letter, his eyes scanning it quickly. "Is this real?" "Yes, sir. I've been preparing for 2 years. I leave for our day in June." What happened next still haunts me. Instead of pride, instead of congratulations, my father crumpled up that letter, my future, my dreams, my proof that I could be something more, and threw it in the trash. "Absolutely not. You're 18 years old, Marcus, but you're still living under my roof. I will not have you throwing your life away on some military fantasy. You're going to Ohio State. You're going to study something practical like business or engineering, and you're going to get a real job. This soldier nonsense ends today." "But Dad, this is the United States Military Academy. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the country. They're offering me everything: tuition, room and board, a guaranteed career as an officer." "Officer?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, you can't even keep your own room clean. You think you're going to lead soldiers? You think you're going to be some kind of general? Look around you, son. Look at where you come from. Kids like us don't become officers. We work in factories. We fix things. We do honest work with our hands. My mother tried to intervene. Dennis, maybe we should think about this. It's a good school. Carol, don't encourage him. This boy has spent his whole life living in fantasy land, and I will not watch him waste 4 years pretending to be something he's not. He turned back to me, his voice getting louder. You want to serve your country? Fine. Enlist after college. Start at the bottom like everyone else from this neighborhood. But this officer pipe dream? It ends today. I retrieved the letter from the trash after they went to bed, carefully smoothing out the wrinkles. The next morning, I called the admissions office to confirm my acceptance. I had 3 months to figure out how to get to West Point without my parents' support, but I was going, even if it meant leaving home forever. The arguments continued for weeks. Every dinner became a battlefield. Every conversation, an opportunity for Dad to remind me that I was delusional and setting myself up for failure. Kevin sided with Dad, telling me I was being unrealistic and disrespectful. Only Sarah supported me, slipping me notes of encouragement and helping me research everything I needed to know about reporting to West Point. 3 weeks before our day, my father made his final ultimatum. We were sitting on the front porch, watching Kevin work on his car in the driveway. Dad had been drinking beer and talking about his day at the plant when he suddenly got serious. Marcus, I'm going to give you one last chance to come to your senses. You go to Ohio State, major in something practical, and I'll help you with expenses. Hell, I'll even co-sign a car loan when you graduate. But if you leave for that military academy, you're not my son anymore. You walk out that door to play soldier, and you don't come back. Ever. I looked at him, this man who'd worked his entire life to provide for us, whose hands were permanently stained from honest labor, who genuinely believed he was protecting me from disappointment. Dad, I respect everything you've done for this family, but I have to do this. I have to try. He nodded slowly, finished his beer, and stood up. Then you're on your own, son. Don't come crying to me when reality hits and you realize you're not cut out for this life. On June 15th, I loaded my single duffel bag into Sarah's beat-up Honda. My parents stood on the porch watching, Mom crying quietly, Dad with his arms crossed and his jaw set. As we pulled away from Maple Street, I saw him turn and walk into the house without looking back. The drive to West Point took 6 hours. Sarah and I barely spoke, both of us understanding that everything was changing forever. When we reached the gates of the academy, with their imposing stone and the words United States Military Academy carved in granite, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. You sure about this, Marcus? Sarah asked as we sat in the parking lot, watching other young men and women saying goodbye to their families. I looked at those gray stone buildings, at the Hudson River flowing past, at the American flag snapping in the wind above it all. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She hugged me tight, whispering, "Prove them wrong, big brother. Prove them all wrong." As I walked through those gates for the first time, duffel bag over my shoulder, and uncertainty in my heart, I had no idea that 23 years later I'd be walking through different doors as a 3-star general, about to receive an assignment that would prove my father wrong in ways I couldn't even imagine. West Point stripped away everything I thought I knew about myself in the first 72 hours. The Beast Barracks, as they called our initial training, wasn't just physical conditioning. It was psychological warfare designed to break down 18-year-old civilians and rebuild them as soldiers. While other cadets had family members cheering them on from graduation ceremonies and sending care packages, I had silence from Millfield. My roommate was Jonathan Phillips from Greenwich, Connecticut, whose father was a Navy captain and whose grandfather had graduated from the academy in 1952. Jonathan's dress uniforms were tailored, his equipment was top of the line, and his confidence came from generations of military tradition. On our first night, as we arranged our sparse belongings in regulation formation, he asked about my family's service record. My father works at Ford, I told him, folding my issued gray t-shirts with precision I'd learned from YouTube videos. No military background. Jonathan paused, holding a framed photo of what looked like a military ceremony. Interesting. Most guys here have some connection. What made you want to come? I could have told him about the books, about the dreams, about the need to prove something to people who'd already written me off. Instead, I said, seemed like the right thing to do. The academic challenges hit immediately. Advanced calculus, chemistry, physics, military history, and leadership theory, all while maintaining military bearing, physical fitness standards, and the endless details of cadet life. Every morning began at 0530 with reveille, followed by personal hygiene time, room inspection, breakfast formation, and 8 hours of classes. Evenings brought mandatory study periods, more inspections, and maybe, if you were lucky, 30 minutes of personal time before taps at 2,330. I struggled initially, not with the academics but with the social dynamics. Many of my classmates had attended elite preparatory schools or military academies. They spoke casually about family vacations to Europe, about sailing and tennis lessons, about college funds and family connections. During weekend leave, when families visited the academy, I watched parents pin new rank insignia on their sons' uniforms while I studied alone in the library. The loneliness was crushing. 3 months into plebe year, I called home once. Sarah answered, whispering because Dad was in the next room. "How are you doing, Marcus? We never hear from you." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I'm fine. How's everyone? Mom misses you. She cries sometimes when she sees your high school pictures. Dad asks about you, but he won't admit it. She paused. Kevin got engaged to Michelle Rodriguez. They're planning a spring wedding. That's great. Tell him congratulations. Marcus, are you happy? Really happy. I looked out my barracks window at the Hudson River, at the mountains beyond, at the place that was slowly becoming home, despite everything. I'm where I belong, Sarah. It's hard, but I'm where I belong. Dad keeps telling people you'll be back by Christmas. He says military school is too tough for dreamers. After I hung up, I sat in the hallway phone booth for 20 minutes, letting other cadets walk past while I processed the reality that my own father was betting against me. That night, I wrote in my journal, something we were encouraged to do for personal reflection, and made a promise to myself. I would graduate, I would become an officer, and someday I would prove that dreamers from Millfield could lead soldiers. The breakthrough came during spring semester. We were studying military leadership under Colonel Martinez, a decorated infantry officer who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He assigned us to research and present on a historical military leader, analyzing their leadership style and decision-making process. While most cadets chose famous generals like Patton or MacArthur, I selected Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, who led the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment in the Battle of Ia Drang during Vietnam. I spent weeks researching Moore's background: small-town Kentucky, state university education, no family military tradition. He'd risen through determination, tactical brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to his soldiers. His leadership during one of the first major battles involving helicopter air mobility had revolutionized modern warfare tactics. My presentation lasted 20 minutes. I discussed Moore's innovative approaches to air assault operations, his personal leadership under fire, and his post-battle analysis that influenced Army doctrine for decades. When I finished, Colonel Martinez nodded slowly. "Cadet Brennan, stay after class." I waited while the other cadets filed out, certain I'd somehow failed the assignment. Colonel Martinez reviewed his notes, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. "That was exceptional work. Your analysis of Moore's tactical decisions and their broader implications showed sophisticated understanding of military leadership principles." He paused. "But more importantly, you seem to connect personally with his story. Why did you choose him?" "Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Moore proved that effective leadership comes from character and competence, not background or connections. He led from the front, made decisions based on what was best for his soldiers, and adapted to circumstances nobody had trained for. That's the kind of officer I want to become." Colonel Martinez smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from an instructor. "Cadet Brennan, you have the mind of a strategist and the heart of a leader. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That conversation changed everything. I began seeking out additional challenges, volunteering for leadership positions, and studying advanced military theory beyond course requirements. My grades improved dramatically, but more importantly, my confidence grew. I started believing that maybe I could actually succeed in this environment. During sophomore year, I received my first real leadership test. As a yearling, I was appointed squad leader for 12 plebe cadets, essentially responsible for mentoring and guiding first-year students through the same challenges I'd faced. One of my plebes, David Chen from Los Angeles, was struggling academically and considering resignation. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," he told me during a late-night counseling session. "My parents sacrificed everything to get me here, but I'm failing calculus, and I can barely keep up with military knowledge requirements. Maybe I should just go home and attend UCLA like they originally wanted." I recognized the doubt, the feeling of being overwhelmed by expectations and challenges that seemed insurmountable. "David, what made you want to come to West Point?" "I wanted to serve. My grandfather fought in World War II, and I grew up hearing stories about honor and duty and making a difference. But looking around here, everyone else seems so much better prepared than me." I told him about Millfield, about my father's prediction that I'd fail, about the nights I'd questioned whether I belonged among cadets from military families and elite schools. "The difference between succeeding and failing here isn't where you come from. It's how badly you want to stay and what you're willing to do to earn your place." We developed a study plan, pairing him with stronger students in mathematics and creating memory devices for military knowledge. I spent hours working with him on drill and ceremony, on room inspections, on the dozens of small details that could make or break a plebe's experience. Gradually, his performance improved, and by the end of the year, he was mentoring newer plebes himself. That experience taught me something crucial about leadership. It wasn't about having all the answers or being naturally superior. It was about caring enough about other people to invest in their success and having the moral courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Junior year brought new challenges as I was selected for advanced military science courses and additional leadership roles. I became company commander for Alpha Company, responsible for leading 120 cadets in daily operations, training exercises, and maintaining the complex social and academic balance that defined cadet life. The position came with real authority but also real consequences. When cadets under my command failed inspections, received academic probation, or violated honor code standards, their failures reflected on my leadership. I learned to balance accountability with mentorship, discipline with compassion, and personal standards with realistic expectations. One incident tested every leadership principle I'd learned. Cadet Thompson, a senior from Alabama, was caught cheating on an engineering examination. The honor code was absolute. A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do, and violation typically meant immediate dismissal. Thompson's case was complicated because he was 3 months from graduation, had already received his branch assignment to the Corps of Engineers, and came from a family with 4 generations of West Point graduates. During the honor board proceedings, I was asked to provide character testimony. Thompson had been a solid performer under my leadership, reliable, honest in his dealings with fellow cadets, and committed to the institution. The cheating incident seemed completely out of character. "Sir, Cadet Thompson made a serious mistake, and he understands the consequences," I told the board. "But in 18 months of serving under my command, he has demonstrated integrity, loyalty, and commitment to his fellow cadets. While I cannot excuse his violation of the honor code, I believe his overall character merits consideration." Thompson was dismissed from the academy. His military career ended before it began. The decision was correct according to regulations, but watching a promising young officer lose everything because of one moment of poor judgment taught me about the weight of leadership decisions and the importance of maintaining standards, even when it hurts. As graduation approached, I reflected on 4 years that had transformed me from an uncertain teenager from Millfield into a commissioned officer in the United States Army. The ceremony itself was magnificent. Thousands of family members filling Michie Stadium, generals and dignitaries on the platform, the long gray line stretching back through decades of American military history. I watched my classmates celebrate with parents and siblings, grandparents pinning on new second lieutenant bars, families posing for photographs that would hang in homes across America. My section was empty except for Sarah, who had driven up from Ohio despite Dad's prohibition against attending. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus," she whispered as we hugged after the ceremony. "Mom wanted to come, but Dad wouldn't let her. He's still convinced you'll fail at the first real challenge." I looked at the gold bars on my shoulders, at the diploma certifying my Bachelor of Science degree, at the beginning of everything I'd dreamed about since childhood. "That's okay, Sarah. I don't need his approval anymore. I have something better. I have proof that I belong here." My first assignment was to Fort Benning, Georgia, for Infantry Officer Basic Course, followed by Ranger School and eventually airborne training. The Army was investing 6 months of additional training in my military education, preparing me to lead soldiers in combat operations anywhere in the world. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave West Point forever, I realized something profound had changed. I was no longer Marcus Brennan from Millfield, Ohio, trying to prove he deserved to be somewhere. I was Second Lieutenant Brennan, United States Army, ready to begin a career of service to my country. The boy who had left Maple Street 4 years earlier with a crumpled acceptance letter and his family's doubts was gone. In his place stood an officer trained in leadership, tactics, military history, and the moral courage to make difficult decisions under pressure. The dreams my father had dismissed as fantasy were now my reality, and this was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, I reported to Fort Benning for the next phase of my journey, unaware that the lessons learned at West Point would be tested in ways I couldn't imagine, in places I'd never heard of, leading soldiers who would trust me with their lives. Fort Benning's heat hit me like a physical wall when I stepped off the bus in June 1998. The Infantry Officer Basic Course would transform me from a newly commissioned second lieutenant into a combat leader, but nothing at West Point had prepared me for the reality of leading actual soldiers rather than fellow cadets. My first platoon sergeant was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran who had served in Panama and the Gulf War. He was shorter than me by 6 inches, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had led men in combat. During our initial meeting, he studied my uniform, noting the airborne wings I hadn't earned yet and the combat patches I'd never wear. "Sir, you're from the academy?" His tone was respectful but evaluating. "Yes, Sergeant. West Point, class of '98. He nodded slowly. "Good school. Produces fine officers, usually. But school and leading soldiers are different things. These men will follow you anywhere if they trust you. But trust has to be earned through competence and care for their welfare. They don't care about your college degree. They care whether you can make decisions that keep them alive and accomplish the mission." My platoon consisted of 32 soldiers, ranging in age from 18 to 35, representing every region of America and nearly every conceivable background. There was Private First Class Williams from Detroit's inner city, who had joined the Army to escape gang violence and support his younger sister. Specialist Jackson was a college graduate from Vermont who had enlisted instead of attending law school because he wanted to serve before starting his civilian career. Sergeant Thompson was working toward his bachelor's degree through correspondence courses while raising 3 children with his wife. They were professionals, but they were also testing me constantly. During our first field exercise, a simulated assault on enemy positions, I made a tactical error that exposed half my platoon to simulated enemy fire. Sergeant Rodriguez pulled me aside after the exercise. "Sir, you got good instincts, but you're thinking too much like a student and not enough like a leader. In combat, perfect solutions don't exist. You have to make the best decision with the information you have, then adapt when things change. Your men need to see confidence in your decision-making, even when you're not completely certain." The lesson was invaluable. Military leadership required balancing careful analysis with decisive action, always remembering that hesitation could cost lives while recklessness could do the same. I began studying not just tactics and strategy, but the personalities and capabilities of each soldier under my command. After 6 months at Fort Benning, I received orders for Ranger School, 61 days of the most physically and mentally demanding training the Army offered. Only 60% of candidates successfully completed the course, and failure meant returning to your unit without the coveted Ranger tab that signified elite infantry leadership qualification. Ranger School began at Fort Benning with the Ranger Assessment Phase, designed to eliminate candidates who lacked the physical conditioning, mental toughness, or leadership potential to continue. We crawled through obstacle courses in full combat gear, conducted forced marches with heavy packs across Georgia terrain, and performed combat missions on minimal sleep and food. The psychological pressure was intense. Instructors called it, quote, controlled chaos, creating conditions where exhausted, hungry candidates had to make complex decisions, while leading teams through simulated combat operations. Mistakes were punished with additional physical training, recycling to repeat phases, or immediate dismissal from the course. During the third week, I was selected as platoon leader for a night raid mission. My task was to coordinate 40 Rangers in a complex assault on a fortified position, requiring precise timing between multiple elements and adaptation to changing enemy responses. The mission began at 2,300 hours after 18 hours of continuous operations and minimal food. As we approached the objective, our reconnaissance element reported unexpected enemy reinforcements. My original plan wouldn't work, but adapting required real-time coordination with squad leaders who were as exhausted as I was. In that moment, I remembered Sergeant Rodriguez's advice about making decisions with imperfect information. Change of plans, I whispered into my radio. Alpha Squad, swing left and establish overwatch positions. Bravo and Charlie, we're switching to a flanking assault from the north. Delta stays in reserve until I call for them. The mission succeeded, but barely. During the after-action review, the instructor's feedback was blunt. Lieutenant Brennan, your initial plan was textbook perfect and completely useless when the situation changed. Your adaptation under pressure showed good instincts, but your hesitation before making the call almost compromised the mission timeline. In combat, soldiers die during those extra seconds of indecision. Ranger School's mountain phase took us to Dahlonega, Georgia, where we conducted high-altitude operations in challenging terrain. The physical demands increased. We carried 70-pound packs up steep mountain trails, rappelled down cliffs, and executed missions at elevations that left even-conditioned soldiers gasping for air. More challenging than the physical requirements was the sleep deprivation. We averaged 3 hours of sleep per night, often less, while maintaining peak performance standards during complex military operations. I learned that leadership under extreme stress required different skills than classroom leadership. It demanded instinctive decision-making, clear communication despite exhaustion, and the ability to inspire others when you barely had energy for yourself. The final phase in Florida's swamps pushed us to absolute limits. We conducted amphibious operations in chest-deep water, navigated through swampland using only map and compass, and executed missions while fighting off insects, snakes, and the constant threat of immersion foot from spending days in wet boots. During one particularly challenging mission, I was assigned as company commander responsible for leading 120 Rangers through a multi-day operation deep in the Everglades. We had been awake for 36 hours, had eaten one meal in 48 hours, and were conducting our third consecutive night mission. 2 hours into the operation, one of my platoon leaders reported that several soldiers were showing signs of heat exhaustion despite the night conditions. Protocol required continuing the mission unless soldiers were medically evacuated, but I could see that pushing forward risked serious injury to men who had already proven their dedication and capability. I made the decision to modify our timeline, allowing for extended rest periods and more frequent water consumption. The instructor evaluating my performance noted the decision but didn't comment. I wouldn't know until graduation whether I had shown appropriate concern for soldier welfare or unacceptable mission compromise. Graduation from Ranger School came after 61 days that had tested every aspect of my character and capability. Of the 240 candidates who began the course, only 147 completed it successfully. As I received my Ranger tab during the graduation ceremony, I thought about the journey from Millfield to this moment. From a teenager whose father predicted failure to an officer, qualified to lead elite infantry operations anywhere in the world. My first operational assignment was to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. The 101st had a storied history dating back to World War II, with combat deployments to Vietnam, the Gulf War, and most recently, operations in Haiti and Bosnia. Joining the division meant becoming part of a legacy of soldiers who had fought in every major American conflict since 1942. As a platoon leader in the 2nd Battalion, 327th Infantry Regiment, I was responsible for 36 paratroopers trained in air assault operations. These weren't the fresh-faced soldiers I had worked with at Fort Benning. They were combat veterans who had deployed to hostile environments and returned with the quiet confidence that comes from proven performance under fire. My platoon sergeant was Sergeant First Class Martinez, a 15-year veteran who had served in Desert Storm, Somalia, and Bosnia. He was exactly the kind of non-commissioned officer who forms the backbone of the Army, tactically proficient, personally courageous, and absolutely committed to soldier welfare and mission accomplishment. "Sir, you've got good training and a solid reputation from Ranger School," he told me during our first private conversation. "But leading paratroopers in combat operations is different than anything you've experienced. These men have been shot at for real, have lost friends in combat, and know the difference between leaders who can handle the pressure and those who break under it. They'll give you their trust, but only if you earn it through competence and genuine care for their welfare." The 101 SOTS training cycle was intense. We conducted air assault operations using UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, practiced urban warfare tactics, and maintained readiness for rapid deployment to crisis areas worldwide. Every soldier in the division could be combat ready within 18 hours of receiving deployment orders. My leadership style continued evolving through constant interaction with experienced soldiers. I learned that effective platoon leadership required balancing multiple responsibilities: tactical proficiency, administrative efficiency, soldier development, and maintaining morale during demanding training cycles. Most importantly, I discovered that soldiers responded to leaders who shared their hardships while maintaining the standards necessary for combat effectiveness. In late 1999, tensions in the Balkans escalated again. The 101st received warning orders for possible deployment to Kosovo as part of NATO's peacekeeping mission. For weeks, we maintained elevated readiness while political negotiations continued. My platoon conducted additional training in urban operations, crowd control, and rules of engagement for peacekeeping rather than combat operations. The deployment order never came, but the experience taught me about the constant state of readiness required for military service. We had to be prepared to deploy anywhere in the world, transition from combat operations to peacekeeping missions, and adapt to changing political situations while maintaining focus on our primary mission: protecting American interests and supporting our allies. During this period, I received news from home that tested my resolve in unexpected ways. Sarah called to inform me that Dad had been laid off from the Ford plant after 22 years of service. The plant was closing, moving operations to Mexico, and hundreds of workers were losing their jobs with minimal severance packages. "He's taking it really hard, Marcus," Sarah told me during a long-distance phone call. "He's 53 years old, has a high school education, and doesn't know what to do next. Mom's working extra hours cleaning houses, but it's not nearly enough to cover the mortgage and everything else." I wanted to help financially, but my lieutenant's salary barely covered my own expenses and student loan payments from college. More painful was knowing that Dad was struggling while his son, the one he'd predicted would fail, was thriving in a career he'd dismissed as unrealistic. "Has he said anything about me, about what I'm doing?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "He sees the news sometimes, stories about the military. Last week there was something about the 101st Airborne, and when your division was mentioned, he got really quiet. I think he's starting to understand that you're not playing soldier, you're actually serving your country in important ways." That conversation motivated me to excel even more, not out of spite, but from genuine desire to honor my family's sacrifices while proving that military service was a worthy calling. Every training exercise, every leadership challenge, every opportunity to develop as an officer became part of a larger purpose, showing that dreams supported by determination and hard work could become reality. As my time as a platoon leader continued, I began thinking about the next phases of my career. Successful Army officers typically alternated between operational assignments and educational opportunities, advanced schooling, staff positions, and specialized training that prepared them for increased responsibility. I applied for the infantry captain's career course at Fort Benning, followed by possible assignments to staff positions at brigade or division level. The Army was investing in my professional development, providing opportunities to study advanced tactics, joint operations, and the strategic thinking necessary for field-grade officer positions. Looking back on my first 2 years as a commissioned officer, I realized how much I had grown since leaving West Point. The theoretical knowledge gained through academic study had been tested and refined through practical application. More importantly, I had learned to lead not through authority alone, but through competence, character, and genuine care for the soldiers entrusted to my command. The boy from Millfield who had dreamed of military service was becoming a professional officer capable of leading soldiers in any environment the nation required. Each challenge overcome, each lesson learned, each soldier successfully trained and developed, added to a foundation that would support increasingly complex responsibilities in the years ahead. What I didn't know was that events happening on the other side of the world would soon test everything I had learned in ways no training could fully prepare me for. September 11, 2001 changed everything. I was in the middle of a training briefing at Fort Campbell when Sergeant First Class Martinez burst through the door, his face grim with an expression I'd never seen before. "Sir, you need to see this immediately. Turn on the television." The images on CNN were incomprehensible at first. Commercial aircraft flying into the World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon burning, reports of additional hijacked planes. As we watched the second tower collapse in real time, the room fell silent, except for the sound of grown soldiers struggling to process what they were witnessing. Within hours, everything changed. The 101st Airborne Division went to the highest state of readiness. All leave was canceled, families were restricted from base, and we began preparing for deployment to locations we wouldn't know until we received sealed orders. The abstract concept of defending America against foreign threats had suddenly become concrete and personal. My phone rang that evening, Sarah calling from Ohio, her voice shaking. "Marcus, are you okay? Are you going to have to go fight somewhere?" "I'm fine, Sarah. We don't know what's going to happen yet, but yes, we'll probably deploy soon." I paused, thinking about how to explain military readiness to civilians. "This is what we train for, protecting America when we're threatened." "Dad saw the news coverage of your division today. They showed Fort Campbell and talked about the 101st being ready to deploy anywhere in the world." He didn't say anything, but I could see him thinking. Her voice got quieter. "Mom's scared for you, but she's also proud. She told me to call and make sure you knew that." 3 weeks later, we received deployment orders for Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. The mission was to hunt down al-Qaeda terrorists and eliminate the Taliban government that had provided them sanctuary. For most soldiers in my platoon, this would be their first combat deployment since the Gulf War. The preparation was unlike anything we had trained for during peacetime exercises. We studied satellite imagery of Afghan terrain, learned basic phrases in Dari and Pashto, and modified our equipment for high-altitude desert operations. Intelligence briefings described an enemy that fought using guerrilla tactics, improvised explosive devices, and intimate knowledge of some of the world's most challenging terrain. My company commander, Captain Rodriguez, called all platoon leaders together for final guidance before deployment. "Gentlemen, everything changes once we cross into combat operations. The soldiers looking to you for leadership aren't training exercises anymore. They're life and death situations where your decisions determine whether your men come home alive. Every tactical choice, every risk assessment, every leadership decision carries weight you've never experienced before." He looked each of us in the eye. "Some of you will discover you're natural combat leaders. Others will struggle with the pressure and responsibility. But all of you will be tested in ways that reveal your true character. Your soldiers are counting on you to be the officers you've trained to become." We deployed to Bagram Air Base in November 2001, flying into a country that looked like another planet. Afghanistan's mountains rose like jagged teeth against empty sky, and the landscape was so desolate it seemed incapable of supporting human life. Yet people had lived, fought, and died in these valleys for thousands of years. Our first missions were search-and-destroy operations targeting Taliban strongholds in the Hindu Kush Mountains. We would insert via helicopter into remote valleys, establish patrol bases, and conduct multi-day operations hunting enemy fighters who knew the terrain far better than we did. The first time I led soldiers into actual combat changed me permanently. We were conducting a dawn raid on a suspected Taliban weapons cache when we began receiving accurate small arms fire from multiple positions. The distinctive crack of Alaska 47 rounds passing overhead triggered training that had become instinctive. But the knowledge that people were trying to kill us added urgency, unlike any simulation. Contact left, Specialist Johnson screamed into his radio while returning fire toward muzzle flashes in the rocks above us. We've got at least 6 enemy positions in the ridgeline. Time moved differently during combat. Seconds felt like minutes, while minutes passed like seconds. I had to coordinate my 3 squad leaders, call for indirect fire support, request medical evacuation assets, and maintain communications with higher headquarters, all while making tactical decisions that could save or cost lives. Martinez, take the 2nd squad and flank left around those boulders. Williams, establish a base of fire and suppress those positions until Martinez gets into place. Johnson, get on the radio and call for close air support. We need F-16s up here as soon as possible. The firefight lasted 37 minutes before the enemy withdrew deeper into the mountains, carrying their wounded and leaving behind weapons, ammunition, and intelligence materials that confirmed they had been planning attacks on coalition forces. None of my soldiers were seriously wounded, but the reality of combat, the sound of bullets passing inches from your head, the responsibility for other people's lives, the split-second decisions that determine mission success or failure, was unlike anything training could simulate. That night, as we established defensive positions on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, Sergeant First Class Martinez approached me during my watch. "Sir, you did good today, stayed calm, made good decisions, took care of your soldiers," the men noticed. He sat down beside me, looking out at the star-filled Afghan sky. "Combat leadership is different than garrison leadership. Today you found out you can handle it." Over the following months, we conducted dozens of operations throughout eastern Afghanistan. Each mission taught lessons about leading soldiers in combat that no classroom could provide. I learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether local villagers were friendly, neutral, or actively supporting the enemy. I discovered how to balance aggressive pursuit of military objectives with protection of innocent civilians. Most importantly, I understood that combat leadership required absolute trust between officers and enlisted soldiers. They had to believe completely in my competence and commitment to their welfare. The defining moment of my first deployment came during a mission in the Tora Bora cave complex, where intelligence suggested senior al-Qaeda leaders might be hiding. We were tasked with clearing a series of interconnected caves that had been fortified and supplied for extended resistance. Cave clearing is among the most dangerous military operations. Confined spaces, limited visibility, no room for maneuver, and enemies who know the terrain intimately. My platoon was assigned to clear the northern entrance, while other units covered alternate exits and escape routes. As we approached the cave entrance, hidden explosive devices detonated, wounding 2 of my soldiers and alerting defenders to our presence. The mission could have been aborted, but intelligence indicated this might be our only opportunity to capture high-value targets before they escaped into Pakistan. "Sir, we can't get casualties evacuated until we secure this area," Sergeant Martinez reported. "But those caves are going to be a nightmare to clear with enemy forces already alerted." I had to make a decision that balanced soldier welfare with mission requirements. Exactly the kind of choice Captain Rodriguez had warned us about. Pulling back meant losing potentially critical intelligence and allowing dangerous enemies to escape. Continuing forward meant exposing my soldiers to exceptional risk in confined terrain that favored defenders. "We're going in, but we're doing it smart," I decided. "Martinez, organize suppressive fire on that entrance. Williams, prep fragmentation grenades for the first chamber. Johnson, establish communications with close air support in case we need emergency extraction." The cave clearing took 6 hours of methodical, dangerous work. We found extensive weapons caches, communication equipment, and documents that provided valuable intelligence about enemy operations throughout the region. But no senior leaders. They had escaped through passages we didn't know existed. During the after-action review, our battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, pulled me aside. Brennan, you showed mature judgment under difficult circumstances today. You balanced aggressive mission execution with appropriate concern for soldier safety. That's the kind of decision-making we need from company-grade officers in this environment. As my deployment continued, I began receiving additional responsibilities that indicated confidence in my leadership capabilities. I was appointed as Company Executive Officer, responsible for logistics, personnel management, and coordinating support for all combat operations. The position required different skills than platoon leadership. I had to think strategically about resource allocation, anticipate future operational requirements, and ensure that administrative details didn't interfere with combat effectiveness. One of my most challenging assignments was organizing the repatriation of Sergeant Thompson, a squad leader who was killed by an improvised explosive device during a routine patrol. Thompson had been scheduled to return home in 3 weeks for the birth of his first child. Instead, I had to coordinate with military mortuary affairs, the Red Cross, and his family to ensure his body was returned home with full military honors. Writing the letter to his widow, explaining how her husband had died serving his country in a place most Americans couldn't locate on a map, taught me about the ultimate responsibility that comes with military leadership. Every decision I made as an officer affected not just soldiers under my command, but families back home who trusted us to use their loved ones' lives wisely and honorably. The letter to Mrs. Thompson was the hardest thing I had ever written. Dear Mrs. Thompson, it is with profound sadness that I write to inform you of your husband's death while serving with distinction in Afghanistan. Sergeant Thompson died instantly when his vehicle struck an improvised explosive device while conducting operations against enemy forces threatening coalition positions. Please know that your husband was an exceptional soldier and leader whose courage and professionalism were respected by everyone who served with him. His loss is deeply felt by all members of this unit, and his sacrifice in service to our nation will never be forgotten. Sergeant Thompson spoke of you and your unborn child constantly, and his dedication to providing a safe world for his family motivated everything he did as a soldier. While no words can diminish your grief, I hope you can find comfort in knowing that he died doing work he believed in, surrounded by soldiers who considered him family. Sending that letter home, along with Thompson's personal effects and his Bronze Star Medal for Valor, reinforced my understanding that military service involves sacred responsibilities that extend far beyond tactical operations. My first deployment to Afghanistan lasted 14 months. When we returned to Fort Campbell in early 2003, I had been promoted to captain and recommended for advanced military education. The Army was investing in officers who had proven themselves in combat, preparing us for the expanded global responsibilities that followed September 11th. But returning home also meant confronting changes in my family situation that I had avoided thinking about while focused on combat operations. Dad's unemployment had stretched into its second year, and the financial strain was affecting everyone. More troubling was Sarah's report that he had started drinking heavily, spending afternoons at Murphy's bar talking about how factory jobs were disappearing and men like him were being left behind by economic changes they couldn't control. He asks about you sometimes, Sarah told me during a phone call shortly after I returned. Especially when news reports mention Afghanistan or the 101st Airborne. I think he's starting to understand that what you're doing matters, but he's too proud to admit he was wrong about your military service. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that had existed since I left for West Point, but I wasn't sure how to approach a man who had written me off so completely. Military service had given me confidence in leading soldiers through life and death situations, but it hadn't prepared me for healing relationships damaged by years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings. What I didn't know was that events were already in motion that would force a resolution to our family's unfinished business, and that my next assignment would test everything I had learned about leadership, courage, and the true meaning of service to something larger than yourself. The Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth represented the next crucial step in my military education. This 10-month course was designed to prepare mid-level officers for battalion and brigade command positions, focusing on strategic thinking, joint operations, and the complex decision-making required for senior leadership roles. My classmates included officers from every branch of the military, as well as international students from allied nations. Major Peterson from the Air Force had flown combat missions over Iraq. Lieutenant Colonel Hassan from Jordan had extensive experience with Middle Eastern counterterrorism operations. Commander Williams from the Navy brought expertise in maritime operations and logistics planning. The academic curriculum was intellectually demanding in ways that differed completely from West Point or previous military schools. We studied grand strategy, analyzing how military operations supported broader political objectives. Case studies examined everything from the Marshall Plan to recent peacekeeping missions in the Balkans, forcing us to think beyond tactical problems toward the strategic implications of military decisions. My thesis project focused on counterinsurgency operations in complex terrain, drawing from my Afghanistan experience to analyze how conventional forces could adapt to fight non-traditional enemies. The research required studying conflicts from Vietnam to Northern Ireland, identifying patterns in successful and unsuccessful approaches to insurgent warfare. Professor Mitchell, a retired colonel who taught military history, challenged my initial conclusions during a seminar presentation. Captain Brennan, your analysis of tactical adaptations is thorough, but you're missing the broader context. Counterinsurgency isn't primarily a military problem. It's a political and social challenge that requires military solutions integrated with economic development, governance reform, and cultural understanding. Pure military excellence isn't sufficient when the enemy's strength comes from popular support rather than conventional capabilities. That observation forced me to expand my thinking beyond purely military considerations. Successful officers in the modern era needed to understand diplomacy, economics, and cultural dynamics, as much as tactics and logistics. The enemies we faced in Afghanistan and Iraq weren't defeated through superior firepower alone. They required comprehensive approaches that addressed underlying political grievances while maintaining security. Midway through the course, I received news that changed everything about my relationship with my family. Dad had suffered a massive heart attack while working a construction job, his third employment since the Ford plant closing. He was in intensive care at Toledo Hospital, and doctors weren't certain he would survive. I requested emergency leave and drove straight to Ohio, arriving at the hospital to find Mom and Sarah maintaining a vigil in the cardiac care waiting room. Dad looked smaller than I remembered, connected to machines that monitored his vital signs and provided medications to keep his heart functioning. "He's been asking for you," Mom whispered when she saw me. "The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." When I walked into his room, Dad was awake but barely conscious. He looked at my uniform. I had come directly from Fort Leavenworth without changing clothes, and his eyes focused with more clarity than I expected. "Marcus." His voice was weak, but unmistakable. "You came." "Of course I came, Dad. You're my father." He was quiet for several minutes, just looking at me. Finally, he spoke again, his words slow but deliberate. "I was wrong about you, wrong about the military, wrong about what you could accomplish, wrong about everything." He paused, struggling with the oxygen mask. "I've been watching the news, reading about what you soldiers are doing over there. You're fighting for our country, protecting people like us, and I told you it was all fantasy." I pulled a chair close to his bed, taking his hand. "Dad, you were trying to protect me from disappointment. You worked your whole life to provide for our family, and you wanted me to have security." "No, son, I was scared. Scared that you were braver than me, that you were willing to risk everything for something you believed in while I played it safe my whole life." His grip tightened slightly. "I spent 22 years building cars, and the company threw me away like I never mattered. But you're serving something that will always matter." We talked for hours, bridging years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings. He asked about Afghanistan, about my soldiers, about the responsibilities of military leadership. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had my father's respect and understanding. Dad recovered from the heart attack, but the experience transformed our relationship completely. He began calling regularly, asking about my career progression, and expressing pride in my military service. More importantly, he started attending veterans events in Millfield, connecting with other men who had served, and finding meaning in supporting military families. Returning to Fort Leavenworth, I approached my studies with renewed focus. The reconciliation with my father had resolved emotional conflicts that had motivated me since childhood, allowing me to concentrate on developing as a military professional, rather than proving my worth to people who doubted me. My next assignment was as a company commander with the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia. Command of an infantry company, approximately 150 soldiers, represented the culmination of everything I had learned about military leadership. Company commanders were responsible for training, discipline, morale, and combat readiness of their units, with direct accountability for mission success and soldier welfare. Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 69th Infantry Regiment was scheduled for deployment to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Unlike Afghanistan's counterinsurgency operations, Iraq involved conventional warfare against organized military forces, followed by stability operations in urban environments with hostile civilian populations. My first priority was evaluating the leadership team I had inherited. First Sergeant Williams was a 20-year veteran who had served in Desert Storm, Somalia, and Kosovo. He understood soldier management, logistical requirements, and the administrative complexities of maintaining combat readiness. My platoon leaders were experienced officers who had proven themselves in previous deployments. But I also inherited problems typical of units preparing for combat deployment. Several soldiers were facing personal crises, divorces, financial difficulties, family emergencies that affected their focus and reliability. Others had disciplinary issues that required immediate attention before deployment. Most challenging were soldiers who were technically competent, but lacked the mental toughness necessary for combat operations. One soldier, Specialist Davis, had excellent technical skills, but showed signs of severe anxiety about deployment. During training exercises, he performed well until simulated combat scenarios triggered panic attacks that made him unable to function effectively. "Sir, I want to serve my country, but I don't think I can handle combat," he told me during a private counseling session. "Every time we do live-fire exercises or practice urban warfare, I freeze up. What if I let my squad down when it matters?" I faced a dilemma familiar to commanders throughout military history, balancing individual soldier welfare with unit readiness and mission requirements. Removing Davis from deployment would protect him from psychological trauma he might not be able to handle, but it would also deprive his squad of a technically skilled soldier and potentially stigmatize him for the remainder of his military career. After consulting with military psychologists and medical personnel, we developed a treatment plan that included additional counseling, modified training scenarios, and close monitoring by squad leaders. Davis deployed with us to Iraq, where he proved to be one of our most reliable and courageous soldiers. The Iraq deployment began in March 2003 with the initial invasion phase. Unlike Afghanistan's mountain warfare, Iraq involved mechanized operations across desert terrain, urban combat in cities like Baghdad and Fallujah, and complex stability operations among civilian populations caught between coalition forces and insurgent groups. My company's first major engagement occurred during the advance toward Baghdad, when we encountered Republican Guard units defending key highway intersections. The battle lasted 14 hours and required coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and close air support, exactly the kind of combined arms operations we had trained for but never executed in actual combat. Leading 150 soldiers through sustained combat operations tested every aspect of my leadership development. I had to make tactical decisions while maintaining communications with higher headquarters, ensure adequate supplies of ammunition and medical support reached forward positions, and coordinate with adjacent units to prevent friendly fire incidents. Most importantly, I learned that company command required different leadership skills than platoon leadership. As a platoon leader, I could know each soldier personally and directly influence their performance through individual relationships. As a company commander, I had to lead through subordinate leaders, trusting platoon sergeants and squad leaders to implement my intent while adapting to local conditions I couldn't directly observe or control. The transition from conventional warfare to stability operations presented entirely new challenges. Instead of destroying enemy forces, we were responsible for establishing security, rebuilding infrastructure, and winning support from Iraqi civilians who viewed us with suspicion and fear. This phase of operations required cultural sensitivity, diplomatic skills, and patience qualities that weren't emphasized in traditional military training. We had to distinguish between legitimate civilians and insurgent fighters, provide humanitarian assistance while maintaining security, and build relationships with local leaders who could help establish stable governance. One incident crystallized the complexity of our mission. Iraqi civilians reported that insurgents were using a local school as a weapons storage facility. But approaching the school required passing through a neighborhood where children played in the streets and families conducted daily business. Any military operation risked civilian casualties that would damage our relationship with the community, but allowing insurgents to operate freely from the school endangered both coalition forces and Iraqi civilians. I had to develop a plan that neutralized the military threat while minimizing risk to innocent people. The solution required coordination with Iraqi police, careful timing to minimize civilian presence, and precise execution by soldiers who understood that every action would be scrutinized by local populations and international media. The operation succeeded without civilian casualties, but it demonstrated the incredibly complex decision-making environment that characterized modern military operations. As my Iraq deployment continued, I began receiving recognition that indicated potential for advancement to higher levels of responsibility. My battalion commander recommended me for accelerated promotion and selection for advanced education opportunities. The Army was identifying officers with potential for strategic leadership roles, and my performance in combat command positions had apparently impressed senior leaders. What I didn't realize was that these recommendations were already moving through channels that would determine the entire trajectory of my military career, setting the stage for challenges and opportunities I couldn't have imagined when I first walked through the gates of West Point as an uncertain teenager from Ohio. 20 years later, I stood outside the Pentagon's river entrance, wearing 3 stars on my shoulders and carrying orders that would change my life forever. The journey from that crumpled acceptance letter in my father's trash to this moment had taken me through deserts in Afghanistan, streets in Iraq, staff positions in Washington, and command assignments across the globe. My promotion to lieutenant general had come after serving as a brigade commander in Afghanistan, division chief of staff in Germany, and Pentagon assignments that exposed me to strategic planning at the highest levels of military leadership. Each position had built upon lessons learned as a second lieutenant, but none had prepared me for what awaited in the chairman's office. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood when I entered his office. His presence commanded immediate respect. He was a soldier's soldier who had earned 4 stars through competence, integrity, and unwavering commitment to American military excellence. "Marcus, congratulations on your promotion. Please, sit down." His tone was friendly but formal, indicating this was official business. "I have an assignment for you that's going to challenge everything you've learned about leadership and strategic thinking." He opened a classified folder, revealing satellite imagery and intelligence reports I couldn't immediately identify. "We're establishing a new joint task force for counterterrorism operations in the Pacific region. The position requires coordinating operations between all service branches, managing relationships with allied nations, and developing strategies for threats we're just beginning to understand." I studied the materials, recognizing the complexity of the mission he was describing. Joint operations involving Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps required diplomatic skills as much as military expertise. Working with allied nations added layers of political considerations that went far beyond tactical planning. "Sir, this sounds like exactly the kind of assignment I've been preparing for my entire career." General Morrison smiled. "That's why we selected you. Your combat experience, staff work, and demonstrated ability to work with diverse teams make you ideal for this position. But Marcus, I want you to understand something important about this assignment." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "This task force will be headquartered in Hawaii, but you'll be responsible for operations spanning from Japan to Australia, from the Philippines to Guam. You'll command forces from multiple nations, coordinate with intelligence agencies, and advise senior civilian leadership on military options for complex political situations." The scope of responsibility was staggering. As a lieutenant general, I would be responsible for strategic planning that could affect global security, commanding resources that represented billions of dollars in military capability, and making decisions that could influence American foreign policy throughout the Pacific region. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence in my abilities. When do I assume command?" "Next month, but first I want you to take some leave time. Go home to Ohio, see your family, and remember why we serve." He stood, extending his hand. Lieutenant General Brennan, the United States military is entrusting you with significant responsibility. Use it wisely. The drive to Millfield took 6 hours, giving me time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The kid whose father predicted he'd never amount to anything was now responsible for military operations across one of the world's most strategically important regions. I found Dad in his garage, working on an old Chevrolet he had been restoring since his retirement. The heart attack had slowed him down physically, but his mind remained sharp, and his hands still knew their way around an engine. He looked up when I walked in, immediately noticing the 3 stars on my uniform. Well, I'll be damned. 3 stars. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, studying my insignia with wonder. That makes you a pretty important fellow, doesn't it? It makes me responsible for a lot of good soldiers, Dad. He nodded slowly, then walked over to his workbench and picked up a small American flag that had been folded in military style. This belonged to your grandfather, my father. He served in World War II Pacific Theater. Never talked much about it, but he was proud of his service. I had never known my grandfather had been a veteran. Dad had never mentioned military service in our family history. He would have been proud of you, Marcus. Hell, I'm proud of you. Dad's voice was thick with emotion. I spent so many years thinking I was protecting you from disappointment, but really I was just scared of my own failures. You proved that dreams backed by hard work can become reality. We stood in that garage, father and son, finally understanding each other after decades of miscommunication and hurt feelings. The flag he pressed into my hands represented more than military service. It symbolized family legacy, personal courage, and the responsibility that comes with achieving dreams others thought impossible. That evening, our entire family gathered for dinner at Mom's request. Sarah brought her husband and 2 children. Niece and nephew I barely knew because of constant deployments. Kevin came with his wife and teenage son, who peppered me with questions about military life and combat operations. Uncle Marcus, did you really fight terrorists in Afghanistan? My nephew asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. I served with some of the finest soldiers in the world, protecting our country and helping other people gain freedom from oppression, I replied carefully. Military service is about more than fighting. It's about standing up for what's right and protecting people who can't protect themselves. Mom had prepared all my childhood favorites, and we spent hours talking about family memories, current events, and the future. For the first time in decades, I felt completely connected to my roots, while also understanding how far I had traveled from them. The next morning, I visited my old high school to speak with students about military service and leadership opportunities. Standing in the same gymnasium where I had once felt like an outsider, addressing teenagers who reminded me of my younger self, I realized how completely my life had been transformed. Success isn't about where you start or what other people expect from you, I told them. It's about having the courage to pursue your dreams, despite obstacles and criticism, working harder than anyone expects, and never giving up on yourself even when others give up on you. After the presentation, a quiet young man approached me privately. He reminded me of myself at 18, uncertain, ambitious, and clearly wrestling with big decisions about his future. Sir, my parents want me to go to community college and learn a trade, but I've been thinking about the military. They think I'm being unrealistic. I looked at this kid who could have been me 25 years earlier, facing the same choice between safety and dreams, between other people's expectations and personal ambition. What does your heart tell you to do? I want to serve my country. I want to be part of something bigger than myself. I handed him my business card. Follow your heart, work harder than everyone around you, and never let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big. The military needs young people who want to serve for the right reasons. As I prepared to leave Millfield for my new assignment in Hawaii, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me from that crumpled acceptance letter to 3-star rank. Every challenge overcome, every lesson learned, every relationship built, had contributed to this moment. The boy who had left Maple Street with his family's doubts and his own uncertainties was gone. In his place stood Lieutenant General Marcus Brennan, United States Army, ready to lead joint operations across the Pacific, responsible for protecting American interests in one of the world's most complex strategic environments. Standing in my childhood bedroom for the last time, looking at the military history books that had first inspired my dreams, I understood that success isn't just about achieving personal goals. It's about using your achievements to serve something larger than yourself, to protect others' dreams, and to prove that any American willing to work hard enough can rise as high as their courage and character will carry them. The phone call came the next morning. My new command was ready, and the Pacific awaited. As I drove away from Millfield, I carried with me my grandfather's flag, my father's blessing, and the absolute certainty that the best chapters of my story were still to be written. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.